Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. In this video we'll take a look at the HD7750, an entry-level card that should slot in between the R7250 and the HD7770. The GPU runs at 800 MHz and the number of 512 shader cores is between what the R7250 and HD7770 have to offer. Due to both latter cards running at 1 GHz, the shader performance of the HD7750 is identical to the R7250. The only advantage the former has over the latter is a higher pixel rate, placed somewhere in between the R7250 and the aforementioned HD7770. And this brings us to the hidden agenda of this video, trying to understand what games prefer pixel rate performance over shader performance. I personally expected most games to rely more on pixel rate, especially since we are running them at their lowest settings. There are fewer effects and even simpler lighting to be rendered, so shaders should be far less stressed. We'll definitely keep a scoreboard for this. To both review the card and put this theory to test, I ran the card in the Z230 workstation, which has the i7-4770 equivalent Xeon and 32 GB of DDR3 at 1600 MHz. The 55W TDP card gets away in terms of cooling with the same solution as the other two cards, an aluminum flower for a heatsink and a 2-pin fan. Temperatures are fine, reaching 60°C in Heaven and 61 in Warframe for deltas over ambient of 37 and 38°C respectively. The first game where the HD7750 gets tested is Alien Isolation. As usual, we do a quick run in survival mode at 1080 resolution and ultra settings. The video card averaged 41 FPS, 3 more than the R7250 and 11 less than HD7770. This game, at the settings we're tested for, seems to be more sensitive to floating point performance rather than the raster output performance. Let's move to Apex Legends. We ran the zipline in the firing range back and forth, initially at 1080 resolution and low settings. The average frame rate is 37 for the 7750, 7 FPS less than the 7770, and 3 FPS more than the R7250. This seems to be similar to the previous game, and the shaders are still the main factor to performance. The game becomes multiplayer playable, however, only at 720 resolution, reaching an average of 58 FPS and 30 FPS for the 1% lows. Moving on to Warzone, I'm testing at 720 and low settings, except shadow caches, those stay on. The average frame rate was 35 FPS, 9 less than the HD7770, but 16 FPS more than the R7250. This would indicate that the pixel rate of the card is more important than this game and settings. The results here are more for science, if you will. Playing the game with this card will get you wiped out. For Battlefield 5, I use for benchmark the training mission at 720 resolution and low settings. At 42 FPS on average, the HD7750 is only 4 FPS away from the R7250 and 9 FPS from the HD7770. This seems again another point for the shaders team for a tally of 3-1. The card is definitely good enough for the single player campaign. The 1% loss of 20 FPS won't be that much of a bother. Online though, your KD ratio won't win you any award. From my previous experience with the game, I expect control to be another point for the shaders team. As usual, we had a run between ventilation and the NSC plant at 720 resolution and low settings. The card averaged 35 FPS, a single FPS ahead of the R7250, but a whopping 13 FPS lower than the HD7770. Even the 1% loss of 18 is much closer to the former comparison card. There is virtually no difference between the two. Score another one for the shaders. Rainbow Six Siege is the next game to test, and just like before, we tested this one at lowest settings and all combinations between the 1080 and 720 resolutions on one hand and the 100% and 50% scaling values. The performance of this card is again much closer to the R7250 than the HD7770. on all 4 runs for just 2 to 5 FPS more than the former and 10 to almost 30 FPS less than the latter. While we acknowledge another one for the shaders team, we might as well mention that the 720 is the resolution where you will stand a chance online. Let's see now how GTA 5 did. We used the built-in benchmarks for this one, and at 1080 resolution and normal settings, the card averaged 75 FPS, making it 6 FPS faster than the R7 and 10 FPS slower than the 7770. I feel pity for the pixel rate team, so I will award it a point for a 5-2 score. The 1% loss of 52 FPS won't be much of trouble for this mostly single-player game. As usual, I played a bot match in CSGO at 1080 resolution and lower settings, and the card averaged 93 FPS and 1% loss of 54. This is 30 FPS less on average than the 7770, and almost identical to the R7 Even this old DX9 title seems to favor the shaders instead of pixel rate. I don't expect the next game to behave differently since it shares the same engine, but only the numbers will tell. What you see on the screen is a match replay in Dota 2. To test the HD 7750 in this game, I opted for 1080 resolution and lower settings, except the render scale, which stayed at 100%. The average of 91 FPS is higher than the R7 by 8 FPS. It is also 6 FPS higher than the 7770 as well, pointing out to my top-notch benchmarking skills. Sorry about that. I won't award any points in the shaders versus pixel rate match, but I will point out that the game runs quite well on this card. Fortnite was the game that had me thinking of pixel rate as a possible limiting factor in video cards. But that was back in Chapter 2 Season 6, and much has changed since then, from map layout to even the game engine. At 1080 resolution, performance mode and a draw distance set to far, the HD 7750 averaged 59 FPS, 8 more than the R7 and 28 FPS less than the 7770. The game plays fine at 1080 resolution, but lowering it to 1600 by 900 or 720 will improve the average up to lower 90s. While this recent comparison adds another point for the shaders, the next game promises a point for the opposing team. But before we get to it, we're halfway through our tests, so let's take a look at the scoreboard, and it seems that 7 games favor shaders and 2 favor the pixel rate. Let's continue with Overwatch 2. Back when I was testing this game on the GCN cards, I noticed the same performance between the R7 and the HD 7770, and I attributed that to the same pixel rate. The card from today's review, the HD 7750, averaged 62 FPS at 1080 resolution and low settings, 7 FPS more than the R7 and 14 FPS lower than the HD 7770. This behavior is similar to the performance in GTA 5, so the pixel rate gets another win. Back to running this game with the 7750, my advice is to lower the resolution to 900 or lower, and the FPS will average above 80, and 1% lows should not drop below 60. I replayed the match in Rocket League at 1080 resolution and lower settings, and the HD 7750 pulled 93 FPS on average, only 6 FPS less than the HD 7770, and 5 FPS more than the R7 This matches perfectly the pixel rate disparity between the 3 cards, and the list of games that prefer pixel rate over shader performance adds another title. The game plays perfectly fine. The 1% loss of 37 are more related to camera changes during the match replay. At 1080 resolution and lower settings, Splitgate averaged almost 60 FPS. Almost. That puts it 12 FPS faster than the R7 and also 12 FPS slower than the 7770. The game becomes even more playable at 720 resolution, with the average going in low 90s and 1% lows almost reaching 70 FPS. As for our secondary objective, This test gets another win for the pixel rate performance, bringing the score to 7-5, still in favor of shaders. It remains to be seen if Valorant breaks this streak. The spike planting training mission at 1080 resolution and low settings had the 7750 averaging 224 FPS. This is 17 FPS more than the R7250 and 10 FPS less than the HD 7770. The 1% lows of 150 is also in between the two cards, making the game perfectly playable. Having the performance of the HD 7750 in between the R7250 and the HD 7770 means that this game also likes the pixel rate more. I was wrong when I considered Genshin Impact being influenced mostly by shaders. At 1080 resolution and lower settings, except rendering scale, the HD 7750 gets 48 FPS on average, 8 more than the R7250 and just 12 less than its bigger brother, the 7770. This makes it another point for the ROPs. The 1% loss of 38 FPS is more than okay for the single player title. As for the HiRez studio trio of games, Paladins, Royale and Rogue Company, all of them ran at 1080 resolution, but at different quality settings, and I expect this to influence what part of the GPU, the shaders or the raster output affects the performance. Paladins averaged 87 FPS and got 51-41% lows for mostly high settings. The average is lower than what both R7250 and HD 7770 netted, but this can be explained by the different map being played. I tried to benchmark around Royale by dropping in the same area each time. The card averaged 77 FPS and 1% lows in the mid-40s, also at higher settings. This is 5 FPS higher than the R7250, but almost 30 less than the HD 7770. The game plays just fine with the 1% loss of 47 FPS, and it does award a point to the shaders. Rogue Company netted 75 FPS on average and 48 FPS 41% lows at low settings. This is 13 FPS more than the R7250, but almost 30 less than the HD 7770. The game plays just fine and it seems to favor shaders. So far, despite the pixel rate making a comeback, the shaders still lead. World of Tanks Blitz will not provide any surprises. The FPS cap of 60 is matched on average at 1080 resolution and low settings by the HD 7750. Same goes for our comparison cards, and that happens also for the 1% lows. The game plays just fine. Before we continue, just a quick reminder of the one advantage that all the GPUs still have against integrated graphics, no matter how performant the latter are. That one advantage is the ability to resell the GPU to recover the cost for it. Good luck recovering the cost for the iGPU, and yes, those costs are not zero. But anyway, back to the tests. As usual, the Warframe benchmark consists of a run through the Mariana mission at 1080 resolution and a mix of settings, mostly low. The HD 7750 averaged 103 FPS, 6 more than the R7250, but 38 less than the HD 7770. The 1% lows stays above 50 and the game plays just fine. However, the performance of the HD 7750 was much closer to the R7250. This game likes shaders apparently. The shader count does matter, and the list of games that prefer this contains quite a few popular titles. On the pixel rate side, there are a few popular games as well, but more experiments are needed. This is not what I expected, or wanted for that matter. I would love a cheap Radeon card that is as powerful as the HD 7770, but gets away without the 6-pin power connector. Unfortunately, the HD 7750 is not that card, and my other dream of games preferring pixel rate vanished after testing it. The card finds itself in a tough spot with the HD 7770 on the one side providing better performance for very little if any difference in price, and the R7 250 on the other side going even cheaper for almost the same performance. Now, some would say that for the 80 watts TDP, the HD 7770 can be powered with a SATA to 6-pin adapter without much risk, and you're probably right. However, I do have another plan for the MSI version of the 7770, but that's the topic for another video. As for this review, well, we're done. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for the next one. There are fewer effects and even simple lighting to be The first game where the HD 7770